At 2:37 a.m. on March 12, 1945, Hauptmann Klaus Weber was inspecting ammunition depot number 7 in Duisburg at the industrial heart of the Ruhr. Everything was in order. For 1,200 tons of explosives organized in meticulous corridors, guarded by 40 Wehrmacht soldiers and a surveillance system that the Germans considered impenetrable. Weber couldn't have imagined that, at that very moment, something was already inside the depot. Something that hadn't triggered any alarms. Something that made no noise upon entering. Something so improbable that, had he known, he would have thought it was a bad joke from the Allies. Because what was about to destroy 4,200 tons of German ammunition was rubber. Ordinary rubber. Or at least, that's what it looked like. 6 hours later, Depot number 7 vanished from the map in an explosion so violent it shattered windows 8 kilometers away. But the most intriguing part wasn't the destruction. It was the silence that preceded it. Because nobody heard a thing. No planes. No falling bombs. No saboteurs. Just silence. And then, hell, what the Germans didn't know was that they were facing one of the most bizarre and brilliant operations of World War II. An operation that began with an apparently impossible problem to solve. How to destroy Nazi ammunition depots buried meters deep, protected by reinforced concrete and 24-hour surveillance, without using a single bomb or sending a single soldier. The answer would come from an unexpected place. From the British Naval Research Laboratory, where a chemist named Dr. Lionel Tony Erickson was studying something that seemed completely out of context in a war. He was studying rats, more specifically dead rats, stuffed rats, and what he discovered would change the course of the war on the Western Front. To understand what happened in the Ruhr, we need to go back to 1943, when British Mi-6 faced a critical problem. German armament factories in the Ruhr Valley produced 60% of the ammunition used by the Wehrmacht. Conventional bombings destroyed buildings, but the Germans had built almost indestructible underground depots. The RAF would need hundreds of missions to destroy these targets, losing dozens of planes and hundreds of men in the process. It was simply unsustainable. British command needed a creative solution. They needed something that could enter the depots undetected. Something small, something innocent, something the Germans would never suspect. That was when Dr. Erickson presented his proposal to the Special Operations Executive, the SOE. The idea was so absurd that the first officer who heard it thought Erickson had gone mad. Rats? Asked Colonel Maurice Buckmaster, head of the SOE's French section. You want us to use dead rats to destroy German ammunition depots? But Erickson wasn't crazy. He had identified a peculiar behavior in German industrial facilities. The boilers that powered the Ruhr factories were fueled by coal. And where there is stored coal, there are rats. Many rats. The Germans knew this and accepted it as an inevitable part of industrial operation. When German workers found a dead rat near the boilers, they did exactly what anyone would do. They picked up the body with a shovel and threw it straight into the furnace. Without a second thought, without inspecting it, they simply eliminated the body and moved on with their work. It was an automatic behavior, a reflex, and Erickson realized that this reflex could be turned into a weapon. The proposal was technically simple but ingenious. Take dead rats, empty their bodies, and fill them with high-potency plastic explosive, specifically C3, a new type of explosive that was as malleable as modeling clay and could be molded into any shape. The explosive would be encased in a layer of synthetic rubber to mask its smell and texture. But the true genius of the operation lay in the detonator. Erickson developed a temperature-activated ignition mechanism. When the rat was thrown into the furnace, the extreme heat would trigger a delayed chemical reaction. The explosive wouldn't detonate immediately. It would take between 15 to 45 minutes to explode, enough time for the German workers to be far away from the boiler. The boiler's explosion would cause a fire that would spread rapidly to adjacent coal depots. And since the Germans built their industrial complexes with maximum efficiency, the coal depots were always close to the ammunition depots. The result would be a devastating chain reaction. All this without a single shot, a single plane, or a single infiltrated soldier. The project was codenamed Operation Ratcatcher. Between October and December 1943, SOE technicians produced 150 explosive rats in secret London laboratories. Each rat was meticulously prepared. The skin was treated with chemicals to simulate recent decomposition. The eyes were replaced with glass replicas. Even the weight was adjusted to feel natural. The first 40 rats were sent to occupied France in January 1944, hidden in medical supply shipments destined for the French resistance. SOE agents trained resistance cells on how to handle the devices. The instruction was clear: plant the rats in German factories, power plants, and depots, preferably near coal storage areas. But then something unexpected happened. The Gestapo intercepted a shipment of explosive rats in March 1944 in Lyon. 4 French agents were captured, and 3 of the rats fell into German hands. The operation was compromised, or at least that's what the British thought, because what happened next was even better than the original plan. The Germans were absolutely terrified. The Gestapo issued a maximum security alert for all industrial facilities in the Reich. Heinrich Himmler personally ordered that all rats found in factories be incinerated immediately, but not before being inspected. Inspected to ensure they weren't disguised explosives. The result was mass hysteria. German soldiers began inspecting every rat found in the facilities. Thousands of man-hours were diverted to hunting rats. Security meetings were held. Identification manuals for suspicious rats were distributed. One SS officer even created a 14-page protocol on how to identify British explosive rats. Winston Churchill, upon hearing of the German paranoia, reportedly laughed for 5 straight minutes and then commented, "Look at that. We sent dozens of rats, and they gave us thousands of guards paralyzed by fear." The operation had become a psychological weapon more effective than a physical one. The Germans were hunting ghosts, and while they hunted ghosts, the real threat was being prepared. Because while the Germans focused on real rats, the SOE was developing the second phase of Operation Ratcatcher. This time, they wouldn't be real rats. They would be rubber molds. Perfect replicas of rats, but entirely made of synthetic rubber mixed with plastic explosive. Visually indistinguishable from a real rat, but much easier to transport and deploy. These rubber rats were masterpieces of engineering. Each one weighed exactly 340 grams, the average weight of an adult European rat. The rubber texture imitated rodent fur. The eyes were hand-painted, and most importantly, they emitted no chemical odor that could alert German sniffer dogs. The synthetic rubber used was vegetable oil-based, which completely masked the smell of the explosive. Between September 1944 and March 1945, SOE agents and resistance members planted hundreds of these rubber rats in German facilities across the Ruhr Valley. The method was always the same. Wait for the shift change, throw the rat near the coal pile, and disappear. German workers, still conditioned by Gestapo paranoia, inspected every rat found. But here was the problem. How do you inspect a perfect replica? German soldiers looked at the rubber rats and saw rats. Some even cut open the bodies to be sure. But all they found was a core of material that looked like decomposed tissue. Actually plastic explosive covered by layers of chemically treated rubber. Satisfied it was just a dead rat, they did exactly what they always did. They threw it in the furnace. The first ammunition depot to explode was in Essen on February 8th, 1945. The explosion was so powerful that British seismographs recorded the impact 400 kilometers away. The Germans initially thought it was a bombing raid, but no Allied aircraft had been detected. No engine sounds, no air raid sirens, just a devastating explosion coming from nowhere. 3 days later, another depot exploded in Dortmund, then Bochum, then Duisburg. One by one, the ammunition depots of the Ruhr Valley began to vanish in mysterious explosions. The Germans were desperate to understand what was happening. Saboteurs? But there was no evidence of infiltration. Time bombs? But no bombs had been dropped at those locations. A Gestapo report from March 18, 1945, recorded German frustration. The explosions continue. There is no identifiable pattern, no signature of sabotage. It is as if the depots themselves are deciding to explode spontaneously. And in a sense, they were. Because every German worker who threw a rubber rat into the furnace was, without knowing it, activating a time bomb. The strategic impact was devastating. Between February and April 1945, 41 German ammunition depots were destroyed by unexplained explosions in the Ruhr Valley. This represented 37% of the Wehrmacht's ammunition storage capacity in the region. Millions of shells, bombs, and grenades were destroyed. The Allied offensive across the Rhine met a dramatically weakened German resistance. General Dwight Eisenhower wrote in his diary on April 2, 1945, "The German ammunition situation in the Ruhr has collapsed inexplicably. Our troops are advancing with minimal resistance." Something extraordinary happened here. He didn't know that the something extraordinary was rubber rats. And he wouldn't know until years after the war ended, when Operation Ratcatcher was finally declassified in 1978. But perhaps the operation's greatest victory wasn't physical destruction. It was psychological destruction. Until the end of the war, German soldiers continued to obsessively inspect rats. Thousands of work hours were lost. Paranoia spread. A German soldier captured in April 1945 confessed to British interrogators, "We were more afraid of the rats than the bombings. At least the bombings you could hear coming." Dr. Lionel Erickson, the man who imagined the operation, never received public recognition during his life. He died in 1962, at 68, taking to his grave the silent pride of having created one of the most unlikely and effective weapons of World War II. His colleagues at the Naval Laboratory said he always had a peculiar sense of humor. Tony saw weapons where no one else did, a colleague recalled. He looked at a dead rat and saw an opportunity. The original rubber rats were all destroyed after the war by order of MI6. Only one survived and is on display at the Imperial War Museum in London, in the Unconventional Weapons of World War II section. It is a faded piece of rubber the size of an adult hand, with glass eyes that seem to look at you with an expression that could be described as malicious. The museum plaque reads, "British explosive rat, c. 1944. Used in sabotage operations in occupied Europe." It doesn't mention how many depots it destroyed. It doesn't mention the panic it caused. It doesn't mention that this small piece of rubber and explosive helped shorten the war by months. It just says, unconventional weapon. And technically, it is correct. Today, few historians talk about Operation Ratcatcher. It is overshadowed by larger, more glamorous, more cinematic operations. But for those who study unconventional warfare, the rubber rats represent something fundamental. They prove that intelligence, creativity, and understanding of human psychology can be as devastating as 1,000 bombers. Perhaps more. Because in the end, what destroyed 41 Nazi ammunition depots wasn't brute force. It was the understanding of a simple human behavior. When you see a dead rat, you throw it away without a second thought. The Germans built their defenses against armies, against planes, against tanks. But no one builds defenses against dead rats. And that was exactly the gap the British exploited. Here at Secrets of War, we love finding these stories that seem impossible but are absolutely real. Stories that show war isn't just about tanks and planes. Sometimes it's about a British chemist looking at a dead rat and thinking, I can turn this into a weapon. And the most fascinating part of this story? The Germans never fully discovered what happened. Even after the war, captured German reports still spoke of unexplained explosions in the Ruhr. They knew about the explosive rats from 1944, but they never connected the dots with the explosions of 1945. They never imagined they were throwing bombs into the furnace with their own hands. It makes me think, how many other secret operations are still hidden in the archives? How many unlikely weapons changed the course of history without anyone noticing at the time? And how many times has what seemed impossible become not only possible, but devastatingly effective? If you enjoyed this story of how an embarrassing piece of rubber destroyed dozens of Nazi depots without making a single sound, leave your like, subscribe to the Secrets of War channel, and hit the bell. We have dozens of stories like this, stories you won't find in conventional history books. Stories that prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the biggest, it's the smartest. And tell me in the comments, what part of the story surprised you the most? The German paranoia? Dr. Erickson's genius? Or the fact that rubber rats destroyed more ammunition than hundreds of bombers? I'll see you in the next episode. Until then,